I'm Leon Todd for G66. Welcome to another Tuesday Tone Tip. In today's video, I want to talk about three of my favorite things in Axe-Fx III Firmware 15.01. There are some new amp and drive models as well as an update to the power amp modeling in the Axe-Fx III. Furthermore, if you're an FM3 user, the FM3 has just been updated to Firmware 3, and the amp block in the Axe-Fx III and the FM3 are now using exactly the same amp modeling. So everything from the Axe-Fx III has now been ported over, all that good stuff. They're now in perfect lockstep. So all the amp stuff I talk about, you can do on your FM3 as well, and it will sound exactly the same. Let's get started with thing number one. It's this brand new 59 bass guy jump model. By the way, I'm playing a Les Paul with P90s straight into the Axe-Fx III, straight into Pro Tools, no post-processing as always. With this particular model, I like to turn the normal drive all the way down, start with the bright drive around 2, set the EQ for the so-called Fender Magic 6 settings, bass at 2, mids at 3, and then 2 times 3 is 6, which gives you the treble value. I don't really touch the presence too much. I'm using a pair of the factory bass guy cabs. Actually, I'm only using one at the moment, the 57. We'll talk about blending some cabs in here. It kind of ties in with the little tips I'm talking about here. But let's just have a listen to how this sounds on the middle selection, so both pickups on. So it's a really snarly, nasty sounding amp with this particular cabinet IR. One thing I would say is try this. Try blending a 57 and a 121 in the cab block. I normally set the 121 about 6 dB lower. We get this. So there's this really cool, aggressive 50s thing happening in there with the kind of high mids that I really like with this amp. One thing you can do to just fatten everything up once you've got the right amount of kind of drive and EQ, personally, I would probably turn the bass down a bit more and maybe bring the mids down a bit more. But again, your mileage may vary with this stuff. Do not be afraid to go to extreme positions with any of these controls. I'd bring up the normal drive as well, just to add a bit of fatness. I find turning up to about 1. Let's add a bit of reverb to that. I'm using the concert hall. I said a little bit of reverb, but that's actually quite a lot. You can add a compressor in front of that as well, and I really like this JFET compressor type with this particular amp. It's wonderful for that kind of bluesy thing, but if you use like a Marshall IR, I've got one of my own cabs here, and you crank the bright drive on this, let's turn the compressor off, it becomes a rock and roll machine. Really awesome. Sounds really cops that kind of 70s southern rock thing, especially with a big reverb like that. I'm going to just turn the mix on this reverb and the time down a little bit so we're hearing more of the amp. But let's go back to that kind of cleaner thing, because thing number 2 are some of the new drives in the drive block. Let's just have a listen to the clean sound so far. more an edge of breakup thing than anything else, which I like. I don't necessarily like drives right in front of super clean amps. So let's check out the DS1. The Axe-Fx III finally has a DS1 model in here, and you know, it sounds like a DS1. There's also a modified DS1, which I personally like the sound of a lot more. So with this, I would turn the distortion and the tone down just a little bit. It's still a really nasty, spitty kind of drive. It's a character tone, but if you turn the distortion all the way up and the tone down, you kind of get this fuzz tone. Which is really, really cool. Let's hear that with the original DS1 model, same settings. I think I like the mod more. So that one's really cool. There's also this 1981 drive, which is basically a modified Rat, and this is a great amp if you want to run a clean Fender amp, but then kind of transform it into more of a Marshall-y thing. That's probably one of my favorite like amp in a box style drives. I actually much prefer it to the Rat models in here. I find you have to kind of crank the cut control up, otherwise it's super bright, especially with this. Let's have a listen to the cut like all the way up. There's kind of this little zone here around 7 or 8 where you can really kind of hear it kick in. So I would recommend starting around there. Let's go back to this DS1 mod though with a really high gain amp, because I really like that in front of distortion as just a thickening agent on a guitar tone. So we're going to use the Boogie Mark IV model here, the USA lead mid gain. Let's turn that reverb mix up again because I want some more verb. I want a big thick lead sound, and let's just hear it without and then with the DS1. Don't need a whole lot of distortion or tone again. So let's do this. So yeah, that's a pretty rad one in front of an already driven amp. You know, if you want to do the Steve Vai For the Love of God tone, this is the block you want to put in front of your, like, you know, Legacy model or your Atomica or one of the Marshalls or something like that. It gets it so close. Before we talk about thing number 3, I need to swap guitars. I did a standalone video on this parameter over on my YouTube channel if you want to check that out. I did it with the FM3 though, but I think it's worth reiterating on the Axe-Fx III. The new power amp modeling really means this one parameter hidden here in the power amp block becomes a whole lot more powerful. It's called transformer drive, and it is modeling the amount of distortion in an amp's output transformer. And I just find with something like this USA lead mid gain that turning up the transformer drive to about 2 just gives it a bit more kind of grunt in the low end. I'll leave it at 1. When I press enter on my keyboard, it's going to change it over to 2. Have a listen to just the kind of low end grunt and growl. So it's a really good way to just kind of fine-tune the low-end response of your amp without doing a whole bunch of tweaking to the tone you already like. Like I said, just kind of on the Mark model, maybe turn it up to 2. If you're using something like an old Plexi, don't be afraid to turn it up to about 3 or 4. It's a pretty simple one, and I would put this particular one up there with stuff like playing around with the speaker impedance curves and the output compressor. Say if you set the output compressor to this gain enhancer, that's a really good way to increase pick attack and volume control sensitivity if you're into those kind of things. There's also a bunch of new digital in and out routing options, which is really powerful. I did a video again over on my channel, which you can go and check out. And otherwise, go and download the firmware, update your Axe-Fx III. If you're an FM3 user, load up Firmware 3 because the amps just sound insanely good. Insanely good. I really mean that. I think it's getting to the stage now where it's not just like how much like my amp does it sound, it's kind of like how much better than my amp does it sound. So I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you have any specific questions, let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay excellent and be good to one another. Cheers.